aligned. We've got the guys from MultiAdaptor today. It's Joe and Izzi. Brilliant to have you with us. I appreciate your time, especially go back into the studio, and Izzi with a very damaged leg. I hope that's props up and you've got some medication to hand to help you through this. Just if anybody wants to catch up on any of our old events, we started to put some of the ones that we've recorded onto YouTube. So there's a link in the live chat. So if you want to just go back and see any of those, that's they're all available now. We've got people like Ragged Edge, Koto, Anthony Burrell, and quite a few other people from a wide range of disciplines. And also, if anybody's got any questions for the guys, just drop them into the live chat as well, and I'll ask them throughout or at the end. Just if you've got anything that you'd like specifically answering. So Izzi, while we're just letting people in, if it's possible for you to take us back to when design or creativity first played a role in your life, whether as far back as you want to, and then just lead us through your early stages in the career in the industry. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could probably start really, really early, but that might take a little while. Yeah. So I'll just give the highlights. I think I took the path that a lot of designers took, that a lot of us wanted to be architects, really wanted to be an architect, but couldn't do any math. So I stayed sort of pretty involved in art and that sort of thing whilst I was in high school in America. And then I decided to do a graphic design degree. So I completed my graphic design degree, and then I actually began working as a designer before I became a strategist, as I am now. So I very much come from a traditional designer background. So I was a design intern at MultiAdaptor, then became a designer there, and then very accidentally became a strategist that I am now. So I was always very interested in sort of the research, the questions, talking to people, really sort of understanding what was going on at the heart of a design process or a problem, and really very invested in sort of that human upfront portion of design work, I suppose. And I just quite sort of accidentally became MultiAdaptor's first strategist under our strategy director, and sort of here we are today.
Wow, so your first role in the industry was with MultiAdaptor, you've not been anywhere else previously?
Also quite accidentally, but I was fortunate enough to have sort of a number of internships lined up, and MultiAdaptor happened to be the first one, and they kept me on as a designer, which I was hugely grateful for. And then I accidentally became a strategist after a little while.
How did you accidentally become a strategist? What was the story behind that?
So I think it actually sort of, I'm sure others will tell the story differently, but from my memory and what I remember, we were a smaller team at the time, and we were working on a pitch, and it was sort of quite busy working on everything, and I got quite involved in helping to do some interviews and some questionnaires and that sort of thing. And I was really interested always in doing the research and coming up with the ideas. So I think that was quite a natural fit, but it sort of worked out quite well. And then we sort of just continued testing my involvement in those upfront parts more and more, I suppose, and it stuck. And then so then they sort of rehired me as a strategist. So sort of a parallel shift, but it worked out for the best. So
did you find having knowledge of design as a designer really helped from a strategy perspective, or are there other key factors that has made you fit into that role really sort of smoothly?
I mean, I think from my personal perspective, obviously strategists don't have to have been designers, so don't have to have that insight, but I definitely find it integral into sort of who I am and what I'm about. I mean, in my day-to-day life, I'd say it's like usually like design first. I still think of myself, as a designer, even if I'm not working as a designer, that's a big part of my life. And I think it definitely allows me to sort of have this, it makes me into the strategist that I am, and that I can be sort of, I think, quite insightful into the design process. I can assist with it. I have additional skills I can call on, sort of help shape that process. And I think it adds a lens to my sort of version of strategy that makes it unique, and hopefully makes it sort of very helpful to be involved with the design teams and the creative process more so. But again, that's just the way I do it. It's definitely not the prescribed way to do it.
Yeah, no, but I think when we've spoken to strategists in the past, I think when, say, 10 or even longer ago than that, years-wise, there wasn't that many routes into strategy. So I think a lot of them come from a design background, because that was really the main entry level at university. But for you not doing that early on, I suppose that combination of that knowledge or those skill sets is really beneficial. But that's something I think we really want to talk about later, about how you work with the design team and that whole process. But Joe, could you also just take us back to when you were, your early memories of design or creativity, and how that sort of led you then to, to education and finding that this could be a career for you?
Sure, yeah. I suppose similar to Izzy in a way, but I suppose I was very academic when I was younger, and I sort of wanted to sort of pursue that sort of realm. I was super into maths, and it's something that I sort of contemplated sort of pursuing further. And it was only until I think it's probably college, just before university, when I sort of started to apply that like really methodical, analytical thinking into sort of like technical drawings. I was super passionate about architecture, and it was sort of that sort of like confluence of those two sort of realms like super interested me. And I love like sort of applying that logical, systemized thinking to design as well. I didn't really see myself as sort of someone who's interested in art, I guess, but I was super interested and really passionate about the sort of the rigor and the sort of analytical thinking that came behind design. So yeah, I got super interested about that, and then I sort of, there's some tutors that really sort of wanted me to sort of pursue that in college, so I did, and it's sort of quite organically from there really. Went to university, studied design, Leeds College of Art, and then ever since then I've sort of took relatively traditional route really. So did a couple of internships during the university, sort of experience in different agencies, and then sort of stepped sort of conventional ladder, I guess. So from junior to midway to senior, and now recently design director. So what someone see is like the traditional quote unquote sort of ladder. But yeah.
So in that part there, Joe, when you sort of talk about your academic focus or passion for that and architecture, I suppose that comes with that, being has to abide by very much certain rules, however much we sort of look at the aesthetics of architecture. And then going into design at uni, didn't you move into architecture or into more academic sort of skills at uni? Was there a missing piece there that somebody maybe pushed you towards design more than the others?
Yeah, perhaps. Maybe aside from the 7-year course, the potential of like studying for 7 years, it was I think it was sort of the variety that came with design. And obviously architecture, there's like numerous permutations, iterations, and numerous different avenues and different types of design. But I think with brand, for some reason I got super into branding during college. Okay. I was super interested about how like people and companies grew and how that they were sort of represented through quite simply a logo. And I don't know, it's something that there's some sort of transition between that and branding. Maybe it's sort of the potential I got super interested by, and then that sort of like leaned and gravitated towards a design degree. And I still wanted to sort of imbue that really sort of like rigorous methodical thinking. That again, that was something I wanted to sort of somehow translate into what I was producing. But yeah, I just like the idea of sort of creating something tactile and immediate versus something that perhaps requires a bit more rigor and systemized thinking. So yeah, perhaps it's sort of the immediacy of it more so.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do that, don't they? In terms of there is something where with design, especially in the early days, you can just create something for yourself that it just satisfies you, as opposed to building a massive brand or changing the world through graphics, etc. You can create an album sleeve or a social media post or whatever it might be, and it's just a case of playing with it, isn't it? But unlike architecture, I presume it's not quite that simple, because you might have a lot of people's lives on your hands. When you moved into your early roles, what were those? Were they all in agencies or that within in-house or?
Yeah, all agencies and all relatively small agencies as well. So it's funny actually, in the sort of third year of university, me and a friend decided to sort of open our own practice. We got on really well during university. Our sort of our ways of thinking aligned. We're quite opposite in the way we approach things. So we thought it could be a good opportunity to sort of pursue our own sort of practice. And I think 6 months in, we reality hit us quite hard, and I think we both sort of decided upon ourselves to sort of pursue our own path. And so that's when I moved back home up north. So I'm from Warrington, near Manchester. And so I moved back home, got a junior designer position in a sort of small agency, very B2B, doing a lot of like annual reports and sort of like startup brands that are very community focused. So that's where I got my first taste of it. And then, yeah, ever since then, sort of, essentially, it's been like 3-year stints. So 3 years of that agency. I went to another agency only, who are now in Manchester. They're very sort of boutique branding. And then, yeah, just kept gaining more and more experience really for bigger brands, bigger clients, and sort of got the taste for it. And then, yeah, about 3 years ago, I moved down to London and got the job with MultiAdaptor.
So when you go, that process of going from Warrington to Manchester to London, which is obviously sort of like a step to like a larger, bigger pool, isn't it? Did you find that was a necessity just to find the work that you wanted, to find the studios that were as ambitious as maybe you? You know, let's say we spoke to only the guys there, and I love like the Printworks, Identity, and a lot of the other bits that they've done. And Matt was saying about, you know, just taking, because they're quite small, aren't they, in relative terms, taking on certain projects. But like, even I think that there was a desire for them to move. I think they were Leeds, wasn't they, originally? Yeah,
they were Leeds, yeah.
To Manchester. You sort of, was that a conscious decision, or did that just sort of happen organically, or did you go and see the bright lights, so to speak?
Yeah, but pretty much. Yeah, I think Only were great. They, like you say, they were super ambitious, working on huge brands. We were such a small team as well, so it was big for us, and it was a big step for us. So it was great to sort of like help them during that sort of period. And I think I sort of did the move to London on a bit of a whim, really. I wanted to sort of experience sort of more richness and more of a wealth of different design agencies, and I had some like studios in mind in terms of like where I could see myself going. But sort of within a month, within 2 months, I moved down. I was freelancing at the time, and my first freelance job was MultiAdaptor, and so that's how I got in. Similar to Izzi, sort of latched on, and been there ever since. So
let go.
Yeah.
Just quickly, Jack, going back to when you say that you started your own studio or own practice with a friend. For anybody that's, I've spoken to quite a lot of people about this, or they've asked me about this, in terms of should I start something like that straight out of university or in their early days? What was it that you mentioned there, sort of like, it hit you quite hard, certain things that needed? What were those things? What was, not trying to put people off, but just the reality that what is needed and what is required, and what were you lacking?
I think it's going back to what Izzi was saying before, it's the not being aware of all the sort of facets of a studio, like strategy. Obviously you sort of imbue all your thinking into your design, but there's sort of like thorough strategic thinking, the sort of client relationships, building that rapport, finances, legalities. There's so many different facets that you're just not privy to during university. I think universities are great. They teach us sort of try new things, experiment, sort of decide who you are as a designer, but most often like they don't sort of surface the reality of being in a studio, or at least owning your own studio. So I think the reality of that, I think the other side of it really hit us quite hard, and we loved it. Like we learned a lot in those 6 months, and we did have like working, and we sort of had referrals, and so we had work coming in, but I think it was just a lot to sort of undertake quite early on. And I think I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad we parked it after 6 months, because the amount I learned since then is just incredible. So maybe I would have learned on by doing, but at the time I just think mentally I wasn't ready. So yeah.
I think that's something we talk quite a lot about. Is I think Joe and I, we talk about this often, is that I always think when you first come out of university, or if you haven't got a degree and you want to get into design, you're first getting into that world. I feel like the first year or so is less about learning how to be a designer and that sort of thing, and it's really about
Is this froze?
Oh no, have I frozen?
Oh yeah, no, you're back in now. Is it? You were just
I'm sorry.
Back in for a second.
Where did I get to?
It was just about coming out of university, or not, or stepping out into the world of work.
I I think something we often talk about is that first year, sort of, I guess, getting into either out of university or just getting involved in design is really learning less about how to be a designer or be a strategist. It's learning how design companies work, how design businesses work, how the hierarchy works, how the client side works. Like, I think there are so many things that you take for granted after a couple of years that you just know how it works and how it happens. But I think that's like the real learning that you can't necessarily get during an education or teaching yourself. And I think that's something really interesting that perhaps isn't discussed enough, that, you know, there really is an awful lot that we take for granted in terms of terminology and processes and ways of doing things that's really difficult to impart unless you're in it and you're learning those things.
Yeah, and I also think that sometimes, from my experience, being in it for so long, you have to maybe rein yourself in and not just talk as fluently as you do because you've used these phrases or you know this stuff, like, especially when you're speaking to, you know, early stage professionals, to understand that, you know, they also need guidance and not just you to bombard them with you know, fancy words, etc., etc. But those, like you say, Joe, those things are really interesting. Like the idea of the, you know, the way that the process that you use, or the way you build clients, or the way that you find work, or the way that you interact with other creators or collaborate. You know, that is a lot. I think a lot of those things that maybe needs to be like a sort of stepping stone from university or college or into the, you know, into the professional world, where there's a way of sort of maybe guiding these people. I suppose an internship does that, but sometimes, in my experience, you can sometimes just be left to yourself, depending on the size of the studio or the type of studio, just left to your own devices for a bit and just mess around, which isn't really that helpful.
Yeah, that's it. It's internships can be quite sort of surface level. And I think that's something like we're super passionate about, is sort of getting them involved, like getting them on client calls, you know, get them sort of like surfacing these things is super important. And, you know, perhaps if I had more of that during university, then maybe I would be more well sort of versed. But yeah, I think just being sort of open and transparent is hugely important.
Yeah. Is it? You just thinking about you when you went to MultiAdaptor on an internship, what was that like from the sense of finding that in the first place? You know, was that just sending out a hell of a lot of you know, blanketing studios just to try and get attention? Because again, that's something I speak to a lot of juniors about at the moment, and it's quite hard to sort of advise that, because that side of the industry has changed a hell of a lot since I was, you know, that was like over 20 years ago for me. What was that like for you? Was that just a panic and hope to find something, or did you target people specifically based upon what they did?
Yeah, so I guess, like, taking us back in time a little bit, I mean, at the time, design was my entire life. I loved being a designer, and design wasn't anything in the world, so it's quite strange that I'm a strategist now. But so I was deeply passionate about it. I think I had quite a firm idea of the sorts of studios that I really wanted to work for, have a chance to meet. And I think, being who I am, I had like a very, very organized like spreadsheet of the different places that I wanted to contact, all the contact details I could get. I mean, I think the reality is I spent days emailing people. I think, you know, it takes a long time. So I was emailing people. I was lucky enough to win a couple of awards, which exposed me to some people at ceremonies and that sort of thing, which, you know, I think is not essential, but again, it's a useful side of networking, which I was grateful for. And yeah, so I managed to get some interviews and things through just emailing people. So I do think cold emailing gets a bad name, but I think it can be effective, you know, if you're yourself and you're nice and you're friendly, and that's the only way you can reach out to these people. So I think they can't disparage you for getting in contact with them that way. So I think that's the way. But then I was actually exhibiting at D&AD New Blood, and someone from MultiAdaptor came past and saw some of my work, and they actually reached out to me, which was really exciting. Yeah, so I went and met with them, and I got offered the internship. And yeah, I guess interning at MultiAdaptor was a much smaller team at the time, and I think a big part of why it worked out is back then, you know, they let sort of interns be involved in client meetings and client workshops and present work, which I think is unheard of in some places. But I think, you know, now that we sort of we're working really hard on our intern program at the moment, just really thinking about, I think those things are so important. Like I really don't believe in just having an intern do sort of tasks that other people can't do. You know, I think it's really important that you're showing them and helping them get their start in the industry, and a huge part of that is talking to clients and presenting and, you know, being involved in workshops. And very little of it, I think, is actually moving things around on an artboard a lot of the time. So I think it's essential that we, as like who've had more time in the industry really take on that role of really trying to share knowledge beyond just like design, because I think in reality, like the branding industry and design industry is about way more than just designing things, isn't it? And we all know that. So I think if you're taking on the responsibility of having interns, I think it's really important that you try and impart those skills. And yeah, MultiAdaptor was very like forthcoming about that stuff at the time. So yeah, it was a great experience.
It must be really refreshing from a creative perspective, if to have an agency that are proactive in that way, where they see your work and they drive that narrative and get you involved and get you to come in. And that was the fact. I've never experienced that. I sometimes wish, you sometimes sit there and go, oh, why isn't such and such phoning me up, or asking for headhunting you or whatever it might be. So to have that flip around a little bit, where you're not necessarily having to do all the work all the time, that must have felt really sort of quite,
yeah. I mean, it was incredible. It was great. That's the email you want to wake up and get, isn't it? Especially as a graduate, sort of, oh, we've seen your work. No, it was amazing. It was a dream, really. So yeah, that was definitely great. And it's obviously a lot of that feeling is just relief, because you're coming out of university and you're like, oh, I have to find something to do next, so there's all of that. But no, it was incredible. I'm just hugely lucky someone happened to glance at that part of that booth on that day. A lot of it obviously is luck and timing, which I think is inevitable, but
yeah, and there's a small percentage maybe of that is luck, but the other way to look at that is that it was you getting yourself out there, and this idea that creatives are a very sort of negative towards networking, so to speak, in the corporate sort of sense of networking. But how important that is to put yourself out there, is to sort of put yourself in the shop window, so to speak, and it was a testament that it works, that there are people looking, and you never know where they might find you, but it needs to be done.
Definitely. I mean, I think I don't like the word networking. I hate sort of the idea of doing it, but I think also outside of that, I think if we remove it from that, it's really just being nice to people, taking advantage of like any opportunity you get to see people, talking about your work. I think it's less sort of this, speed dating sort of network style thing, which I think can perhaps get a bad rep, and perhaps, that sort of thing. But I think, yeah, it's really important, especially as a young creative, just try and get your stuff out there, and you're going to see some people will connect with it, and people are going to like what you're doing and get in touch with you and talk to you about it. So I think, yeah, even if it obviously is terrifying, but I think just try and get stuff out there as much as possible. And I think we as sort of businesses, we're always looking for new people and new perspectives. So yeah, I think it is important to try and get involved in sort of that networking side as early as possible, even if that's just sort of cold emailing people, that counts, or getting your work up at shows or that sort of thing. I think it's also really worth the time investment.
Yeah, and Joe, from your perspective, being higher up in the agency, is that something that you'd like to see? Is it's not a case of just throwing it all on social media because it's saturated and it's hard to sort of see the wood for the trees, so to speak. But in a physical sort of sense, if it's if it's a printed thing that comes to you, or if it's something that you see out and about, is that really important to you guys, for who you might find, where you might find new talent, or just to show that person's proactive and got a bit of a doers attitude?
I think that's it. I think it's the proactiveness. I think if people are proactive and they surface themselves, like that's all that matters. If they're super passionate about us and what they can bring to us, and vice versa, then great. Like whatever sort of medium that comes through, it doesn't really matter. I think it's just sort of getting a sense of who they are, what and what they can sort of offer. Obviously, like things are super difficult now for graduates. There's not so many sort of in-person sort of talks, events, networking events. So I think it's just being super visible and like surfacing yourself and being. I like it when people constantly like chasing you on things. We're super busy, so I don't mind when people sort of constantly sort of email in and check in and ask how we're doing, and vice versa. So I think it's just being consistent. I think it's being sort of available and it's being there. So obviously social media is a great tool. That's how I sort of found myself in agencies, is being sort of like active on social media. I know that's not for everyone, but that's just sort of one tool. And attending like talks like this, and obviously like things are sort of hyper difficult now in this COVID world, but I think it's just being I go back to my original point, I guess. It's just being visible and being super passionate and making it less, as opposed to Izzi's point, making it personal. You don't want to come off as sort of this. I think cold sort of emailing gets a bad rep because people tend to do it in a mass way. But if you're sort of a bit more specific about things and a bit more careful and considerate about how you present yourself, then that's what comes through to me. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm testament to that. Just harassing you guys just to get involved in this, and it worked. But I think it's like you say, it's much more about for us, or how I see it is like you just sort of said there, Joe. Really, is having that. If you're going to contact somebody without knowing who it is, maybe talk about the work that you've seen on their website, or be a bit more genuine in terms of it's not just a dear sir, madam, and it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you do that, you sometimes cock up and you've got the name of somebody else on there, or a different studio, and it becomes a bit obvious that you just be one of many hundreds, aren't you, as opposed to being targeted specifically. And we all like to be taught to, in the sense of, from an honest perspective, or being treated like we're the only person in the room. It's quite a nice place to be, isn't it? It goes to show people have done their background work as well. And moving on to MultiAdaptor, because obviously so far we spoke about you guys individually. For anybody that doesn't know much about the studio, can you sort of give us a bit of a synopsis of what the studio stands for? Core principles, services that you go for. I know you've been in, 2005, wasn't it? You started.
16 years. 16
years. Yeah. So what's the sort of the underlying ethos of MultiAdaptor, if you've got one?
Do you want to take this first?
I could take it if you want, and you can pick up. So about MultiAdaptor, so like you said, so we've been around for about 16 years. So our co-founders are Ben and Andy. They went to university together, and then they started. So conversely to Joe, they started a studio, and then not that they stuck with it, but that kept going. But we're a digital brand agency, so we're based in London, and so what we sort of do is we like to create sort of really highly distinctive brands, primarily for sort of technology companies and technology startups, brands that we really feel are having an impact on the future or changing the way things could be done, whether that's rethinking a product, rethinking a service, working into a new industry. So those are sort of the kinds of companies and businesses that we tend to work with. And we put a real focus on, within that branding world, sort of really breathing life into and forefronting the digital experiences. So the websites and the products are a really, really key part of branding for us. And we sort of believe they sort of all live as sort of one package together. So building sort of really digital first brands and really brand-led digital to the other side are sort of really key to what we do. Joe, don't know if you'd add anything.
I think that's spot on, yeah.
Perfect. Is there a sort of core client that you go for? Because in that respect, digital first, is that more of a startup, modern, just disruptors sort of type brands, or is it really just anybody that fits within what the studio is all about, or do you target people specifically?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's more about who they are and what they stand for versus the size of them. It tends to be, as you said, it tends to be sort of technology companies, whereas software as a service tends to be B2B, but largely most of these B2B are sort of transitioning to sort of a B2C sort of era as well. So it completely differs, big, small. We sort of see ourselves as like the confluence of like big and small as well. We're sort of relatively small team, but we've got sort of like big ambitions. So we're sort of trying to marry sort of the boutique with the sort of the big aspirations. So, and we sort of like see that in our clients as well. So yeah, whether it's sort of sort of artificial intelligence to sort of office space liaison, it completely varies. It just at the crux of it, it's like who they are and what they stand for, and what their ambition is as well. As Izzi said, it's like, what are they changing? What is the future of their industry? So yeah, if we align with that, then perfect.
Yeah, and sorry, Izzi.
No, go ahead.
No, there seems to be when I look through the website of yours and say social media pages, there seems to be much more of an unknown world to this in some respects. You don't necessarily know who the brands are, but you sort of really respect the work and the principles that they have, as opposed to maybe 10 years ago, it was like you'd see the big mega household brands because they just ruled the roost, and it was sort of the way to gauge a portfolio is, they've got Nike in it or Adidas or Google. That means it was good. But now slate seems to have been wiped clean a bit. It's like I say, brands like, I don't know if you heard of Klarna, the finance brand, but they're got a business, they've got a beautiful brand, but you don't necessarily know them because they sort of sit behind the scenes a lot. They just provide the power to make a lot of these shops work, but they now have a really strong presence, and because they've come to the fore and people are buying direct from them, as opposed to previously they might have just sort of sat without a brand or been very minimal, old fashioned. And that's what, when I see some of your guys' works, it's not necessarily the name of the company that makes you go, oh, that's a massive studio. It's just about the quality of the work, the vibrancy. It's really bold. And I think the colours, when I first saw it, is what drew me to it, because it was really sort of vivid in terms of it. It's really hard to explain. It's really rounded, but the colours and the type and it's like there's a huge appreciation of the craft, but it's not stuck in, it's not stuck in the old traditions. It's much more about pushing that craft forward. Is that something that you guys sort of strive to do, or is that just come naturally to the team that you've built?
Yeah, I think it's sort of a reflection of just the consumer landscape in general, I guess. I think we often joke that a lot of the products we're branding are very intangible. Like you said, it's sort of a feeling. Like Klarna, for example, it's like about efficiency and speed and sort of making life easier for people. So I think like brands more so now have more of a purpose at their heart. So it's less of a sort of a tangible product. It's more of a how can they make life easier for people, or how can they enrich people's lives? And it's tricky, but yeah, we always take that and how do we translate that through design and through sort of rigor and systemized thinking. So yeah, that's why I think our sort of like client list varies completely really, because they're targeting different aspects of people's lives. And I know that sounds really grandiose and big, but that's what we sort of like try and uncover with every brand we work on. It's how are they sort of positively benefiting someone, and how can we sort of translate that feeling. I think OneFlow was a really great example of that, because that's something we really sort of extrapolate upon. We sort of took through sort of the strategic insight that Izzi and Andy sort of uncovered. We realized it was all about sort of a feeling that their sort of consumers got. So they essentially do e-contracts, so digital contracts, sort of an antithesis to like traditional PDFs. And they were all about sort of efficiency and speed and the wonder and the sort of like how easy it is. So we sort of capitalize on that feeling, and that sort of became our sort of underpinned brand idea. Really was like capturing that feeling, that emotion, and I think that's it's I suppose it's democratizing it in a way. It's like everyone can sort of latch onto that. So rather than just being sort of this one entity, it's this sort of like malleable, amorphous feel. I know that sounds really grand, but yeah.
But I think that's really important, isn't it? It's the idea that for so long we've sort of, from a consumer's perspective, we've been driven by the traditional powerhouses. I think banking is a prime example at the moment where there seems to be a huge shift in terms of new players in that market, and some will come and some will go. But it's about really, like you say, democratizing it or demystifying it, and sort of giving people an emotional sort of connection to why. But most of the time with a bank, for instance, we used to just stick money in a bank because it was the first one you chose and you couldn't be bothered to change it. They all just did the same. That's what we thought. But now there's we've been given options that go far beyond just, put your money in this big safe and we'll look after it, and nothing will happen to it. And now it's about, how you can use that for greater good, and it for people offer you an option to be, whether it's environmentally friendly or sustainability, or it can go into many different things. And we all now have a wider choice. And I think that emotional connection with as consumers towards brands or businesses is really, really important. And I think that, the brand is ultimately how that's devised, isn't it? And from a strategy perspective, Izzi, that must tie in heavily with what you do and building that framework before the creative is sort of is designed. Is that how you guys work, or is there any specific processes that you put in place?
Yeah, so I would say our process is quite specific. So there are two of us that work on it. So Andy, who's co-founder and strategy director, and myself. So we've been working on strategy together now constantly for about 3-4 years. And I think sort of, as we were sort of saying, we work with sort of tech startups, big technology businesses. I think we find ourselves increasingly working with companies that have very complex products or very complex challenges. It's hardly ever a very simple thing to understand. So it requires like a deep level of understanding and research, and like really trying to find out what they do and how they do it. And then I think that also aids in sort of our priority always being sort of making things simple and like making things transparent to sort of potential clients and to the world and that sort of thing. So yeah, in terms of processes. I won't go into loads and loads of detail, but a huge part of what we do is obviously sort of a traditional brand discovery stage. So really investing ourselves in the teams and the products and their market and sort of additional outside world trends that might be impacting on those, and then we sort of move into beginning to work and build out sort of those brand ideas and the brand personality. And that, I think very early on, sort of in that stage, we begin to think quite a lot about the creative and how that's going to look. So Andy and I were both designers previously, so I think that plays big impact in what we do. And so I think we think in that way, and sort of any brand strategy and brand idea that we come up with, we like to really sort of ensure that it's going to have sort of enough of a creative platform to bounce off of, or that it's going to form that brief that's going to be really, really inspiring to the creative team, so they have something to inspire them to create, but also something that they can go back to that's really easy to understand if they're going in the right direction. And I think to that extent, Andy and I are normally very involved in sort of the concepts phase of brands, so coming up with those ideas and those visuals. I think we do that in a very democratized way, and that everybody in the studio is highly involved in those early days of the brand, be it project managers or strategists or designers. I think we value everybody's sort of creative and design input equally, which I think sort of helps us to create these brands that are going to speak to a lot of people and that are truly going to be understood by everyone. So not entirely sure if that answers your question. I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but I think the high level is that like the creative is like a really big part of our strategy, and I don't think we see the two as that separate at all. They might be separate stages and separate people, but there's an awful lot of overlap and almost a bit of a gradient in between the strategy and the design and how those two interface with one another. So
from both of your design backgrounds, do you then redefine the brief to hand that to the team that are going to work on it until completion? Is that how you tend to work?
So typically what we do is, we'll probably be going through a couple of months in the strategy stage, and then we'll come up with that brand idea and develop a brand model, which will have sign off from the client, and then Andy and I will work on translating that into a creative brief for the designers, so encompassing all of the research and the work we've done. I think it's really important to share that and to expose the design team to sort of all of the knowledge and the background. I don't think it can be as easy as, we just want to design something for this brand. I think a key part of being a strategist is sharing the knowledge and the learnings that are important with the designers that are going to be working on it, so that they can have that knowledge and that history and not constantly be thinking, why does this work like this, or how is that like that? Although questioning is good, but you really want to impart that knowledge so that designers are sort of really empowered to come up with the right solutions. So yeah, we'll spend some time translating that brand idea into a brief and coming up with creative starting points based on what we know about the company. So for OneFlow, as Joe was saying, a big part of the brief was sort of thinking about, what if it was sort of like magic? What if contracts just worked like a spark and instantaneous moments? That idea of magic and sort of removing friction from the contract process really begun to form the brief. And I think in that vein with strategy, we try to come up with I guess like little ideas like that are inspiring and are going to help come up with sort of new and creative ideas. And I think we put the strategy is creative in itself in that way. We try to come up with things that are going to be evocative and allow for sort of design to be born from it.
Well, that must be a really great place to come at client work from, if you've got an understanding of design, some of the principles or some of the restrictions, or just an understanding of typography, color, etc., photography. That must really, really help when sort of taking that and building the strategy, because in the past, like I was saying before we came live, I've spoken to people that are just strategists and work within a company that or a studio have got just designers or just illustrators. And there's sort of like, sometimes there can be a lot of to and fro because there's not necessarily an understanding of one another's skill set. And it can be quite, sort of rubbed against one another in some respects, because you could be going one step forward and 10 back, for a cliche. But if you've got that, and you and Andy have got that knowledge of design as well, that must be really quite a fluid sort of process.
I think, yeah, I definitely think so. And I think to that sort of idea, I think a huge part of MultiAdaptor culturally is this idea of sort of being really multidisciplinary. I mean, multi is sort of in the name, but it's really this idea that although Andy and I have design backgrounds, we have a lot of designers who are interested in strategy or are interested in more of the project management side. And obviously everybody has their roles and that sort of thing, but I think there's this real democratized sort of accessibility in terms of what we do, and I think we have a real fundamental respect for what each other does, but also, you know, I think everybody's genuinely interested in the different stages of the process. And Andy and I don't do things in a vacuum, sort of in our own room and then share it back. It sort of is quite transparent. Frequently designers will get involved in a part of the strategy process, or I might get involved working with Joe on a website wireframe, for example, you know, because I can bring a different insight or a different pair of eyes to it. And I think we really do put that at the heart of what we do. So everybody has their expertise, but I think there's also this sort of empathy for being interested in other people's expertise. And I think we try to really make sure that that's put to the forefront. And I think it does make the transition between sort of strategy and design as the two traditional buckets more fluid and more easy, in that we're really our process is like known to everybody in the business, and everybody knows what's happening, and we try to be really open about what everybody's working on, what's happening, and who can get involved with it. So I think that's really a foundation of the way we do things.
That sounds amazing. I think empathy is a great way of sort of trying to categorize that, isn't it? It's just having that appreciation of everybody else. Joe, on your website, it mentions about being collaborative groups of designers and strategists and other areas of the business. Is that also something that you do externally? Do you bring in people for specific roles, and do you work with other creatives? Because that's become something that's very common in design today. And one of the reasons why I'm asking is that I love the Wunderkind project. I hope that's how you say it. But the illustrative sort of side of that is maybe a little bit outside of the box of some of the other bits I've seen of you. Is that something that you bring people in specifically based on, you know, their approach and style?
Yeah, absolutely. We partner with people who are the best at what they do. So say if illustration comes through the sort of concept phase and we really keen to sort of incorporate illustration, then we'll start it from then on. Like we'll start looking at illustrators that fit the brief, and we partner with people who are the best at what they do, really. So whether that be illustrators, photographers, typographers. We really pride ourselves in collaborating with the best people, and I suppose it goes back to sort of what Izzi was saying about this sort of like polymath mentality. Like it's very symbiotic, so like even with clients as well, we like to get them involved in the process, so we're all sort of interchanging ideas, and it's really sort of democratized and open and transparent. So yeah, we like to get people on and be part of our team as well. So yeah, it's a very sort of like fluid sort of process, really. And it's all sort of project dependent, and we never know from the outset who we're going to partner with. Obviously, we have people that sort of like long-standing sort of collaborators, particularly when it comes to sort of digital and sort of partner with developers and sort of user experience designers. I think the more we sort of ingrain people within our team, the better. And like to your point before, Chris, about sort of strategy and design and sort of the blend of the two, and perhaps, you know, it's less symbiotic in some places. I think we really try and like meld those different worlds together and make it sort of fluid and amorphous as possible, really.
Yeah, and they things that do you find you have to really work at on a continuous basis? It doesn't just happen a lot of the time, does it? Sometimes it's easy to look in on studios, especially if you're not at the same size as they are, or if you've got ambitions to maybe aim for that, is to think that it just comes naturally and it's quite a sort of a straightforward process. Is it something that you guys are constantly having to address? Is it something that you constantly need to sort of evolve and move with the times? That agility is important. Just the idea of bringing clients on board. I mean, for me, when we first started up, that idea was just don't even think about it. You know, it was sitting around with a computer, you know, churn it out as quickly as possible, get the invoice, and then move on. I think it's much more of an idea of there has to be a rounded sort of perspective on this, and to get clients involved is really important. So is that something you really purposefully aim to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tricky because, you know, you need to onboard people, you need to get people familiar and sort of tune themselves to the same sort of wavelength and what the sort of the ambition is, what the sort of hope with the project is. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think like I say, like we do sort of a lot of in-depth thinking in terms of trying to find the right person for the right job, and like you say, sort of get the client on board with that as well, just to make sure they're happy. And and essentially being as sort of transparent and as honest as possible, really. Like as you said, in terms of the strategy work, it's never in a vacuum, and we like to get as many people in as possible. Like branding is for all, right? It's not about sort of your sort of one viewpoint. So where possible, we try and get third-party people involved and sort of help the process and help enriching it as well. Particularly the Wunderkind work, the illustration just brought such incredible like energy and life and vibrancy to the brand that otherwise wouldn't be there. So it's hard, it's tricky, but it is really crucial. And yeah, it does require a lot of thinking. But I think with this sort of the underpinning of all the strategy work and all the research and in-depth thinking that's gone prior, we're in a really good stead then to sort of then use as sort of a jumping off point. So I think that's why the strategy part of the process is so fundamental, because it gives us sort of a source of truth, I guess, that we can get aligned with, the third-party illustrators, photographers can get aligned with, the clients can get aligned with, and ultimately their consumers can get aligned with as well. So I think once we've got that sort of like foundational source of truth, I think it puts us in very good stead.
Yeah. So Izzi, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say, I feel like we should give a specific shout out to the Wunderkind illustrator. Her name is Barbara De Silva. You should all go check her out. She was incredible to work with and obviously brought great light to that. And both of you were just talking about, you mentioned sort of the client side, Chris, and I think that's a really important part of what we do is, I think we try to be like a true partner client. I think a lot of people say this, but I think a lot of people do it really successfully, but we really try to make the clients a part of our team and try to, everybody says we're an extension of the team. But I think what's really important to us is that I don't think we believe in like flourish or performance. We don't produce a lot of stuff and then surprisingly show it to them. I think we really try to lean into the clients know their product the best, they know their business the best, really try to lean into all of the knowledge that they have and really bring them along on the process and show them sort of design as it's happening or strategy as it's happening, and sort of really work together as a duo, and sometimes us more as a facilitator to uncover the insights of what they know, and for that to be a really important part of how we build brands. So really building in collaboration with the clients quite directly and being quite building a really fast, I suppose, rapport that is like quite casual and sort of tries to remove those barriers, I think is really important.
Yeah, and there's something sort of slightly ironic about that, isn't there? That we tend to talk about collaboration has been a word that now gets thrown around quite openly, isn't it? In every sort of, maybe because big brands have just used it quite flippantly just to sort of, to sell something. But what you're saying there is that the idea of we sort of associate collaboration with other creatives or people within a team. The idea that you can collaborate with the client and they're not just somebody that gives you a hollow brief that you have to try and sort of figure out yourself, is that they should be an integral part of that process, because ultimately you're trying to solve a problem that they have.
Yeah, I think so. I think you quite quickly as a strategist learn that there's quite a humility in that you're probably not going to know as much about the company as they know about it, because even though you're the experts to help guide that, they've been doing it for years. It's like their brainchild, it's their baby. They know their industry better, they know the company better, but you're brought in to help steer that and to add in additional and separate expertise to that. But I think leaning into them and collaborating with them really, really closely, I can't believe I just used the word collaborate, but working with them really closely to like glean all of their knowledge and for them to share everything they know. You're going to get things from them that you, as someone who typically probably will be exposed to their industry for like a couple of months, you're not going to learn. So I think that a big part of strategy is just being able to ask questions and like accept knowledge that you won't be able to find. So I think, leaning into that expertise. I don't believe in just like trying to do it yourself and then sharing it back to them and hoping they're surprised and they like it. I think you should work together and really try to combine your learnings and build something as a group and as a team that's going to work for them. Yeah, and
the first time I ever stepped into that world throughout my career, it was I felt more like a psychologist. I was sort of trying to extract things from them that they didn't really ever talk about, or they didn't want to talk about, or they just did the work, or they just built this business, or whatever it might be. And you start to ask them, like, really interrogate them in certain ways to get information out of them. They clam up. So it's sort of how best to really work with them to sort of get them to feel comfortable enough to express those things to a bunch of strangers. Especially, I think a lot of businesses, when I was in that world, they felt like we were just sort of charging them a load of money just to do something that they could do in Flash or Word or whatever, Corel Draw. And you had to be like going back to the empathy and going back to humility, it was all about, really, again, that emotion, making them feel like we're there to sort of improve things and solve a problem as opposed to, make it worse. I think that was the key. And that you sort of have to put a lot of different hats on in that role. But I'm really conscious of the time. I say this every week, super conscious of the time. I could talk to you guys for hours. Unfortunately, I know you're very busy. If anybody wants to find you guys, what's the best place to seek where you're at? Well, both websites and social media.
Yeah, I think we're pretty open, really. So yeah, Instagram, Twitter, the usual sort of channels, really, and even direct to us as well. I love sort of getting emails from graduates and creatives as well. It's just Joe at. So yeah, we're pretty open with that, and yeah, so usual channels, really. And
it's just at MultiAdaptor, isn't it? It's no funny.
Everything's just at MultiAdaptor.
Yeah.
And again, because all these events are primarily aimed at people working in the industry or looking to step into it, that idea that you collaborate and also interested in speaking to people directly is really hopefully helpful for those guys, because it's nice to see that the industry is open and people are willing to sort of, even if it's just to hear people out or check out stuff, bits and bobs, and that conversation can continue between individuals directly in future. So I really appreciate your time, guys. I hope it wasn't too painful. I hope your broken leg is holding up, is he?
Yeah, it's making it through.
Yeah, for anybody that's tuning in, Joe's back in the studio for the first time since lockdown started, is it?
Pretty much. I've been the only person in the studio for the past month or two, so it's just nice to have people here. It's great.
It must be quite hard. They have to interact with people again. It must be a bit strange.
I know, it's my space. They're intruding on my own space. Yeah.
So like I say, I really appreciate it, guys. It's been great to talk to you. I hope you have a great rest of the day and week, and we'll have to catch up again soon.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah.